Welcome to this explainer. I am absolutely thrilled you're joining us today because we are going to completely transform how we think about classroom assessments. If hearing the word assessment instantly makes you picture, red pens, stressful silence, and those final letter grades, well, you are definitely not alone. But today, we're flipping that script entirely. We're going to explore how to design truly meaningful assessments that actually give us actionable evidence for our instructional decision-making.
Okay, let's dive into this. How do teachers truly know whether students are actually learning? It sounds like a totally simple question, right? But your answer to it literally defines the difference between a classroom where learning is just kind of assumed to be happening and a classroom where learning is actually proven. We can't just hope they get it. We have to know for sure that they get it.
So to answer that big question, here is our cognitive map for today's explainer. First, more than just grading. Second, standards as the foundation. Third, the data-driven cycle. Fourth, formative versus summative. And finally, partners in learning.
Let's jump right into Section 1, more than just grading, debunking the myth.
Well, let's start by addressing the elephant in the room. For a lot of students, and honestly for a lot of us teachers too, tests and quizzes carry this really heavy, anxiety-inducing weight. They feel like this final interrogation at the end of a long unit, purely meant to sort out who passed and who failed. But we've got to contrast that traditional view with the reality of effective teaching. The massive shift we need to make is moving away from assessment as evaluation and toward assessment as evidence. Evaluation is just a final judgment, right? It's literally just a grade typed into a gradebook. Evidence, on the other hand, is highly actionable. It tells us exactly where a student's mind is right at this moment and what we need to do next to help them grow. It's not a finish line, it is a roadmap.
And that brings us to dismantling a huge, incredibly common misconception. If students completed the assignment, they learned the objective. How many times have we unconsciously fallen into this trap? We think, well, the worksheets are all turned in, so they must understand the material. But task completion absolutely does not equal true cognitive comprehension. Doing the work just isn't the same as understanding the concept. Compliance is not mastery. We need actual, hard evidence of learning.
Which brings us to Section 2, Standards as the Foundation, Planning for Evidence.
So how do we actually get that true evidence? Well, to fix how we assess, we actually have to shift our focus backward in time. Meaningful assessment doesn't happen at the end of a lesson. It begins way before the lesson even starts. This introduces us to the concept of backward design, or understanding by design. It's an absolutely vital planning framework that requires teachers to identify their desired results and the exact assessment evidence they'll need long before they plan any fun learning experiences. You must begin with the end in mind. Before you ever figure out what cool activity you're going to do on Tuesday, you have to figure out what you want the students to know and exactly how they will prove it to you. It's like a giant puzzle. You got to look at the picture on the box before you start putting the pieces together.
Because if we don't plan backwards, we inevitably fall victim to what educators call the twin sins of planning. The first sin is activity-oriented teaching. That's planning really fun, hands-on activities that keep kids busy but don't actually align with any specific learning outcomes. The second sin is simply covering material, racing through the textbook without stopping to actually gather evidence of understanding. Data-driven planning is the ultimate cure for both of these sins.
And to plan effectively, we have to align our goals through multiple, intersecting frameworks. Think of it kind of like an alignment waterfall. We start at the very top with our state standards, the TEKS. Then we integrate our English language proficiency standards, the ELPs. This flows seamlessly right into our teacher standards, our T-TEST evaluations, technology applications, special education requirements, and PPR. All of these cascade down to the ultimate goal, actual student learning. The most effective planning sits right at the intersection of all these vital frameworks.
Let's move to and see how this builds in Section 3, the data-driven cycle, a continuous loop.
So, now that we've planned with the end in mind and aligned all our standards, how does this actually play out in real time inside the classroom? Well, it plays out in 4 distinct, continuous stages. Step 1, collect. This is where we assess and gather that crucial evidence. Step 2, analyze the data we just collected. Step 3, plan and act based on what the data literally just told us. And Step 4, reflect on the outcomes. Notice something incredibly important here. Assessment isn't at the bottom of this list. It is Step 1.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is this single, massive paradigm shift. Assessment is the beginning of instructional decision-making, not the end. You don't assess to close the book. You assess to figure out which page you need to turn to next. It kicks off the entire cycle of teaching.
Moving right along to Section 4, Formative versus Summative, knowing when to use which.
So, what does this look like practically speaking? Applying this cycle effectively requires using the right tool at the exact right time. It all comes down to timing and purpose. Formative assessment is assessment for learning. It happens constantly throughout the instruction process. Think of it as the GPS in your car, immediately redirecting you when you make a wrong turn. Summative assessment, conversely, is assessment of learning. It happens at the end of a unit. It's kind of like the postcard you send home telling everyone where you finally arrived. Both are super important, but they serve entirely different purposes.
And we gather this data at different frequencies. Short cycle assessments are your daily, immediate checks for understanding, like exit tickets or quick polls. Medium cycle assessments track progress over a few weeks or a specific unit. Long cycle assessments evaluate broad, cumulative mastery, like a semester exam. Varying your assessment frequency gives you completely different types of actionable data to guide your instruction right when it matters the most.
To manage all these cycles well, you need to build your assessment literacy. You have to train yourself to think like a highly analytical teacher by constantly asking three main questions. First, what specific evidence do I actually need to see? Second, what student misconceptions might I expect along the way? And third, does this assessment truly measure the learning goal, or is it just testing their test-taking skills? If you're constantly asking these questions, you are for sure designing meaningful assessments.
Finally, let's talk about the human element in Section 5, Partners in Learning, Redefining Roles. Because, data-driven instruction isn't just about spreadsheets, rubrics, and standards. It is inherently about people working together. So, the crucial point is this. Assessment is a conversation between teachers and students. It should never be some top-down interrogation. It is a mutual, ongoing dialogue. It's a feedback loop where both parties are communicating about where the student is right now and where they're going next.
When assessment becomes a shared conversation, the entire classroom dynamic just transforms. The teacher's role shifts from a rigid evaluator to a coach, a facilitator, a questioner, and a cheerleader. And the student's role elevates significantly too. They aren't just passive subjects taking a test anymore. They are active participants who reflect, set their own goals, monitor their progress, revise their work, and actually celebrate their own growth. It turns the classroom from an evaluator and subject dynamic to a coach and player team working together toward a common win.
Which leads us to one final, provocative question to leave you with today. If assessment is a continuous conversation, what is the data telling you to say next? Think deeply about that as you plan your upcoming lessons. Let's stop viewing data as an endpoint and start using it as our opening line. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I really hope this empowers you to totally rethink your assessment strategies. Keep learning, keep reflecting, and I'll catch you next time.